We are live.
Thank you, Carol. Well, welcome to the last meeting of the House Judiciary for this week. We'll meet as a joint body to decide interim topics with our Senate counterparts, but today will be the final day of the House Judiciary. Carol, will you please call the roll?
Representative Crago,
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Oakley. Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Excuse.
Vice Chair Washit.
Here.
Representative Yen.
Here.
Representative Zwanesser.
Excused.
Chairman Olson.
Here.
Oh, yeah. 7 present, 2 excused.
All right. We have one little Senate file here in front of us today, Senate File 100. That's a good bill on the House side, House Bill 100, or was for a while. Senator, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity. Good to see all of you and present to you Senate File 100. You know, sometimes I think it helps just to understand why a senator or a representative brings a bill like this. For me, this area of our law has been a little bit of a passion, I have to admit, because of my days at Casper College. I spent over 30 years as an administrator at the college and in one duty or another, and ran into so many circumstances where we had victims of this particular crime. Today, we will talk about electronic surveillance, which is something we don't have in our statutes. But back then, it was still a terrible crime, which oftentimes sent students home. We also had staff members who dealt with this particular crime. One in particular, I remember, she really had a difficult time even getting a protective order. Those of you in the law know sometimes that can be difficult, 3 different times. Finally, by the 3rd time that she had a break-in at her house, and at any rate, finally got a protective order, but she was being stalked, and everywhere she went, of course, this guy was showing up. So anyway, I took that forward with me, and today, Senate File 100 comes on the heels of some work that the Judiciary Committee did, Mr. Chairman. 4 and 5 years ago, we actually did quite a bit of work on this part of our statutes, and that was terrific. And it was, I really commend that. So that's kind of the background of this bill. Is it real in Wyoming? I think you'll hear testimony today that it is. One of the most compelling things that I received over the past couple of months was a letter from one of our police chiefs up in a small community up in the northeast part of our state. And she will, I think, have an opportunity to be here today, and you'll hear from her. So I won't share what she wrote to me, but it's very compelling, and it is going on. Unfortunately, electronic surveillance has been made easier, and it's been made affordable, and it's a part of our law that is being taken advantage of now. It's interesting, in doing some homework for this bill, I went online, and we had one law firm in Wyoming that indicated that it was against the law. And we had another law firm that indicated that it was not against the law. So that's ambiguous enough right there that I think it's important that we consider Senate File 100. Mr. Chairman, that's a lot of background on a very small bill, but I wanted to give you a sense of why I think it's important that we consider this. Senate File 100 goes into 62506, our stalking penalty statutes. You'll notice that the bill on page 2 simply adds paragraph 4, which is the use of electronic, digital, or global positioning system device or other electronic means to place another person under surveillance or to surveil another person's internet or wireless activity without authorization from the other person. Subparagraph 4 under paragraph B committee. Paragraph B says, unless otherwise provided by law, a person commits the crime of stalking if, with the intent to harass another person, the person engages in a course of conduct reasonably likely to harass that person, including but not limited to any of the following. And many of you know this section of law, but subparagraph I is communicating with the internet to harass. Subparagraph I, following a person. You see subparagraph 3I, and then subparagraph 4 would be the new language. Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of the bill. I want to stop right there because, as I mentioned, we do have some folks who are experts who can testify today. Be glad to answer any questions.
Vice Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, just a quick question about this intent to harass language and how that applies to this electronic surveillance. If someone puts a tracking device on a victim's car and just sits home and watches the beeps go around town, would that be with intent to harass, or does something further have to occur?
Chairman Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's a great question. Probably one for the legal folks among us. I think that as we take a look at our statute and understand what harassment is, I think that that would qualify, but I'm going to defer to our legal staff on that one. That's a great question. That hadn't come up. Appreciate it.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I can weigh in briefly. It is elemental to the crime, so you would have to prove the intent to harass. So then it becomes a fact question. Let's say you were bringing it, somebody put a GPS on and the woman was unaware. Then you could say, the defendant intended to harass her or surveil her. And then it's a question of fact. Was that with the intent to harass? Yes, every one of these cases, you would have to prove the intent to harass, which then becomes a factual question, but it certainly is elemental to the crime.
Mr. Chairman, just
Senator.
to thank you, just to add to that, appreciate that, Representative. There's so much we could talk about with respect to this this stalking issue, and demographically, the representative just hit on the fact that most of the demographic that is the victim of a stalking incident is 18 to 24-year-old young women. It's almost always someone who has been close to them, probably in a domestic relationship of some kind. They try to get away from what is almost always an abusive relationship. It's almost always something like that. And in trying to get away, this is the first step that that gentleman, who is not a gentleman, tries to stalk and harass. It's interesting that I thought maybe I had a quarter, but a quarter, Mr. Chairman, is the size of what you can put up underneath a car. It's called an Apple tag, or there's other proprietary folks that produce these things. Up home, we had an incident where our law enforcement found 3 of those on one car. You can obviously find some benefit out of those if you want to find out where your kids are or whatever, but people are using these for other means. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple further comments.
Senator, I think that the exchange between you and Representative Oakley may have answered my biggest question or concern, and that was whether this law as structured would provide a exception for minors or my own child. And it seems to me, Representative Oakley, that the language with the necessity to prove the element of harassment would cover that, the intent to harass. That if I were simply putting this on my child's phone or vehicle or whatever, in order to do the things that all of us parents have to do anymore, keep track of our kids in our ever evolving world. As long as I wasn't doing that to harass my child, I would be fine. And I bring that up, Senator, because I don't know who distributed it, but somebody distributed NCSL material. And I noticed that in the states of Delaware, Michigan, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Tennessee, there is a parent or guardian minor child's vehicle exception. And I don't know if you've looked at the language of that. What does that look like? Or if you thoroughly thought this through and your bill covers it as written?
You know, Mr. Chairman, I did, and I provided those handouts to all of you just to
Okay.
give you an idea that well over 20 states are currently working on this issue. And about 8 different states have already dealt with this electronic surveillance piece. I just wanted to give you kind of a broader perspective of the fact that we're not the only ones dealing with this advance in technology and what it has brought to the criminal world. I would absolutely be fine with any language that the committee would feel like it might want to add on that front. I tried to keep this bill fairly tight. A couple to the south of us just passed similar language, just almost exactly like this bill. And that's what piqued my interest and made me decide to bring this bill. So different states are taking a little bit different approach, Mr. Chairman, as you can see.
So, Senator, for example, and I respect that you want to keep this tight. I just want to make sure, I always want to make sure that we're not putting parents in an uncomfortable place. So I'm looking at the language of New Hampshire, for example. It just expressly says no such consent shall be required by the parent, foster parent, or legal guardian of a minor, or by the legal guardian of the subject of his or her guardianship for the persons under, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder if we could make that pretty clear using the authorization language, Senator. It says without authorization from the other person, maybe a simple, just adding that language, honestly, that says no such authorization shall be required for a parent, guardian, et cetera. Would that?
Mr. Chairman, I
any
would
issue?
consider that a friendly amendment, and certainly, that's much appreciated. You're exactly right, though. There's a broader scope here. And I think that those of you on the Judiciary Committee will more than likely get to visit this issue again in the future. It's a moving target. This one just honed in on stalking, but it was interesting last week. I turned on the news back at the hotel room, and there was a long piece on the national news about surveillance of employees. And that's becoming an issue. And it's landing in the legal world to try to sort through what can an employer do and not do. So
Yeah, Senator,
anyway,
I saw that
it's a very big scope that you could
it
get
is. I
into.
saw that some of the states have exceptions for employers. I'm not as interested in, as an employer.
Yeah.
I don't really see the value of that. I'm not as interested in that. The parental one interests me because I think I trust Representative Oakley, and that we would have to prove that element. I just don't want it to be, I think I could see situations where this could be tossed around inside of custody or divorce issues. Sure. And you just add that extra layer of fight is all it really is. And I think if the statute were just really clear, that if you're attaching the tracking device to ex-wife's car, that's different
That's right.
than your child's iPhone, for example, because you would like to know where your child is. So,
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate those cautions. We thought a lot about it, and like I said, we kept the bill fairly tight and fairly targeted just at this stalking element.
the only
Uh,
other exception I'm
yeah.
curious about, Senator, and I'll probably ask Mr. Odekoven for clarification on this, but it's just the law enforcement exception. And I know the statute says unless otherwise provided by law. And I just want to make sure that law enforcement has that clear exception
Sure.
available to them as well. And you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like we're good, but I think we've got some good testimony that might come and might help. Appreciate your consideration and all the good cautions, and thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Okay. Anything else, Senator, before we get to that public comment?
No, I think I just appreciate the chance to bring the bill to the committee, and thank you for hearing it.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Thank you. Do we have any state agencies wishing to testify on this bill? Do we have any state agencies signed up online, Carol? Any hands come up when I ask for state agencies?
No hands.
All right.
Good morning, Chairman. My name is Kara Chambers. I'm with the Wyoming Attorney General's Office, Division of Victim Services. And I'm joined by
Byron Odekoven, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs. She asked me to come and lend support for, and we'll tag off of part of the comments as we work through a couple of the other states. Mr. Chairman, and I know we have at least one chief, maybe, and an investigator awaiting Zoom, which may add further clarity above and beyond what we will offer quickly so we can get to those folks as well.
Agreed. Chairman, I just wanted to point out that the difference, I understand friendly amendment, I get the whole purpose, but I wanted to point out that the difference between what you are attempting to do here versus other states is this is going under the stalking statute. Some states just have surveillance by electronic means, which is why they add those caveats. So the fact that this would be under stalking in itself, I just wanted to point you and remind you of the definition of harassment, which is to engage in a course of conduct, including but not limited to verbal threats, written threats, lewd or obscene statements or images, vandalism or non-consensual physical contact directed at a specific person or the family of a specific person, which the defendant knew or should have known would cause a reasonable person to suffer substantial emotional distress, and which does not, in fact, seriously alarm the person towards whom it is directed. So
Ms. Chambers, I
Yes.
feel like
I know that was really
even
fast.
any certain chore that I may give my daughter, she would
She
would tell me
may,
that
she may.
that I'm causing her extreme emotional distress.
Right. And as a prosecutor on your panel, we'll see if she would take that case up. But and I understand that because I too have a teenage daughter. However, I just wanted to point out that there is a slippery slope when you start making caveats for parents, because we do have parents who are offenders and who could use this. But I really don't think that you, because I have a Bark app on my phone that tracks my daughter and I make her check in routinely. So I don't think that would fall under this. And I think the fact that you're doing this under the stalking, I just wanted to point out the definition of harassment. And
Well, Ms.
do what you
Chambers,
see
let's
fit.
explore your scenario.
Sure.
then. So I definitely appreciate your concern then. So your concern is that there may be a parent who is an offender or otherwise just a bad dude. And we don't want him or her to be able to avail themselves of that exception.
Chairman, yes, because I work with a victim who falls under the scenario exactly. Her father, who repeatedly sexually assaulted her over the years, she's now 17, and he used this to track her. And she had a very hard time getting a protection order because of that. So I always worry about unintended consequences for victims. And so that was just my only 2 cents that I wanted to provide of the scenarios.
That parent still had legal. Is there a way we can
No, sir.
craft that they still had legal custody of the child? I would like to think that as a sex offender who committed the offense against the child's parental rights have been terminated. It is one of the statutory provisions that provide for termination of
Right.
person's rights. Is there a way we can tailor that more narrowly to address that concern? Because that is a concern of mine as well.
Chairman, I will leave the discretion up to you. I'm just merely here to say that I worry about unintended consequences, and I don't think it's necessary. I worry about what happens when you start to carve out these exceptions in what I think is a pretty clean, again, because it's under the stalking statute. So I understand your concerns though, but that's, I'll
Mr.
leave that to
Odekoven?
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me weigh in ever so slightly and think about the process and the scenarios the process proceeds. So if we're looking at the crime that is contemplated under here, that's usually that call. That's the first contact. That's the initial call. So we're looking at this as a stalking charge. Here's what's going on. For the discussion we're having in terms of termination of parental rights, that is after the fact, down the road in the process, a long ways down. We wouldn't start with that and then end up at a stalking moment. That would be quite a ways into the process, that family dynamic as it goes through. So I would echo concern and offer caution again, that this is contemplated to be clearly within the stalking provision, clearly within the definition of stalking. And I appreciate both your comments in terms of making sure parents don't fall under that. So the question becomes, do we need a word in the stalking provision as an exemption for parent, recognizing we don't want to exempt a parent who's clearly stalking based on other issues? And item 2, I would offer that because this is stalking, the courts have already well addressed the law enforcement concern, both for in-car camera videos of arrests as well as detention arena. I think we're covered in that regard, Mr. Chairman.
Committee? You said, I'm Mr. Odekoven. Oh, did you have more, Mr. Odekoven?
I did not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we do have Susan Bridge. That's the Upton Police Chief, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
And then Taylor Courtney is the Casper
Investigator. Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay. All right. Did you want to, are you?
I would yield to them.
Okay.
Mr.
Let's-
Chairman, I would as well. They both can cite specific examples and provide additional clarity on what the trend of stalking is now as it relates to electronic means. And I think you'll hear the necessity for the statute as it was crafted, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect. Let's let them both in then, Carol.
They're both in.
All right. Welcome. Go ahead and light up your cameras, then we know you're here. Miss Bridge, and if you want to light up your camera.
Mr. Chairman, this is Taylor Courtney. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Do you have a camera?
It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Give us just 1 second here. It's a technology Monday. All right, give it a shot now. There we go. All right, welcome. Taylor, since you jumped in, go ahead. Just go ahead and introduce yourself. If you represent an organization, then please tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate being here today. My name is Taylor Courtney. I'm the Sergeant of Investigations for the Natrona County Sheriff's Office. This is my 18th year working up here in Casper, and I appreciate being here. I worked with Senator Landon years ago. We've been working for the last 4 or 5 years on stalking specifically. I had a lot of things I was going to tell you, so I will try to keep it brief and kind of address some of the concerns that have already been outlined. I think primarily I would 100% support what Mrs. Chambers said, that stalking already has a definition to it, and that is to engage in a course of conduct with the intent to harass. There is a definition of harassment that's already in there. So this Senate file does not redefine what stalking is or how it's occurring in our communities. It just adds clarity for the venue in which it's taking place. So sometimes we've been seeing things that are as small as this, if you can see on the screen. So GPS tags can be that small and they can be hidden anywhere. We do find them in cases, but that's not predominantly what we're seeing. What we see are this and this, their cell phones, their computers, their tablets, their OnStar for your vehicle systems. These devices have a GPS system that is already inside of them. And all phones now, because of the emerging technology, are turning into handheld lifestyle trackers. This GPS gets access to the applications that are on your phone. So an application, whether it be through OnStar to start your car, track where that's at, utilizes the GPS that's within the actual cell phone itself. And you, as the user, give Google or Apple the permission to use that. And so stalkers predominantly are just accessing Google and iCloud accounts. And now they can track not only every single place that you're at, maybe where your children are at, or their school information, or they can track your vehicle, they can track your finances, they can track who you communicate with, what you say, the pictures, the videos. Your entire life is on a cell phone, and that's predominantly how stalking is taking place. And that's what's being used as the venue for the harassment, access to the information, and then using that for that harassment to threaten, to follow the person around, to place them under their surveillance and meet those elements that are defined in harassment. That's what evidences the continuity of purpose in the course of conduct. So Representative Washit brought up the use of a GPS or a tracking device to track your children, and it was discussed about parents. Yeah, you can absolutely track your kids. And as a law enforcement officer, if I responded to a call, or I had one of my deputies respond to a call, and a parent was tracking a kid, and you cannot show this course of conduct with the intent to harass, then it doesn't fall under stalking in any way. Law enforcement already kind of has an exception in here, in that if we are going to use a GPS device to track somebody who's suspected of engaging in criminal acts, we have to, under case law, apply for and obtain a search warrant in order to attach those two vehicles. So that is already in there. What this does for us, as far as law enforcement goes, is right now, as it stands, if a perpetrator of stalking is using a cell phone device to track their victim and to know everything about them, and then in turn use that. Let me give you a specific example we had over the last 5 months up here in Natrona County. We had a perpetrator that accessed his victim's Google account. I believe it was Google and not iCloud. And he had access to her college accounts, her financials. He was even able to hack into her Netflix account through the Google. And he was sending her emails saying, oh, I see you're watching this show on Netflix tonight. Now, she and her mother were scared out of their minds because they believed he was sitting outside of their window actually watching them watch a Netflix show. And in reality, he did all of that through these digital electronic means. And so that is predominantly where this is taking place. I would just say that, again, we're not redefining what stalking is with this Senate file. What we are doing is just identifying the venue in which it's taking place in 2022. As far as the court process for, if you have an offender in a divorce situation, or a parent who's offending a child, and we were talking about termination of parental rights. Well, that happens through the juvenile court process. If there's an accompanying criminal case that happens, most often the juvenile court process does not adjudicate until the criminal case does, and that's when the termination of parental rights would happen. So the comments that I've heard today, in my opinion, as running an investigative unit in this state, is absolutely spot on. And I would stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Committee, do you have any questions for Mr. Courtney? What, had a hard time seeing the size of the tile. If you could tell me with respect to the size of a Bitcoin, I would better understand that. I don't really know what a quarter looks like anymore.
So I might have a quarter here, Mr. Chairman. Let me look.
I'm just giving you a hard time, Mr. Courtney.
So here's a standard paper clip, Mr. Chairman.
Aha, I do recognize a paper clip. Thank you. Committee, any questions for Mr. Courtney? All right, thank you, Mr. Courtney. Chief Bridge, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just am honored to be here and to have the opportunity to share what we have experienced up here in the northeast corner of the state. We have experienced several times where we've had this type of exactly what Sergeant Courtney has shared. And our legal teams, our attorneys are hesitant because it's not specifically listed in the statute. We had a woman who was estranged from her husband. She was filing for divorce, and he placed one of those on her vehicle, actually had her son place it on the vehicle, which got even more messy. We are seeing this more and more often. And just yesterday, our department took another case involving non-specified electronic harassment within the statute. Are there any questions?
Chief, actually, could you formally introduce yourself and for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. My name is Susan Bridge. I'm the Chief of Police in Upton, Wyoming. I have been currently here 5 years. I've been in law enforcement since 1986.
Perfect, thank you. Vice Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, you've read this bill that we have before us today. In your estimation, does this solve your concerns? Are there further gaps that you're encountering when it comes to these stalking cases?
Chief Bridge.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, actually, I find this very specific and spot on for what we need at this time, that it covers those specific details. And I'm very pleased with it as it is written.
Committee, any other questions for the chief? All right, Chief, we appreciate you zooming in with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Raise your hand if you plan on testifying on this bill. Tara, I'm assuming you want to testify or? Okay. You can have more than 2 seconds.
Good morning, Chairman Olson, committee members. I'm Tara Muir, Public Policy Director with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. We were really just the backdrop for this, trying to connect folks with what they were struggling with between victims' concerns and the police concerns, that they just needed more detail in the statute. Sergeant Taylor has talked about it. It is inconsistent across the state, depending on the level of resources different departments have. The ability to have time to even chase down more definitions or to make it fit. So with this bill, we just hoped it would fit.
Muir, I should have asked Mr. Odakoven this question, but you might know.
Right.
Is there a federal statute that addresses electronic surveillance of individuals?
I believe there are. There's federal stalking. You have to cross state lines for the stalking part. The surveillance, I'm sure there are, but I did not go down that road anytime recently and review it, so I couldn't answer that for sure.
Okay. Mr. Odakoven, do you have any knowledge of what the federal statutes look like?
Mr. Chairman, quickly, you do have to cross the state line.
Okay.
cannot be done merely within the state.
So it doesn't really matter because we're trying.
It's within the
Yeah,
state.
I got
Yes,
you.
sir.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any questions for Ms. Muir? No? All right, thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify on this Senate file? All right, I will close public comment.
Chairman, we do have Cheryl
Oh.
Fallon with her hand raised.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. We did have one more online, possibly two more.
Yes, we have Sandra Stevens and Cheryl Fallon both have their hands raised.
Will you
at
please
this
go ahead
time.
and admit them both?
I'm sorry, what? Okay.
Okay. Go ahead and have you admitted them? Sandra Stevens and Sheryl
Fallon.
Fallon, go ahead and turn on your camera. All right, Sandra, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sandra Stevens, and I am the Executive Director of Crook County Family Violence and Sexual Assault Services located in Sundance, Wyoming. I've been the director here for over 18 years, and in my time here, I have seen how the stalking law has evolved since 2004, and it continues to be a living, breathing document that we continue to bring back and address. I often get asked, why don't victims leave? Why don't victims leave an abusive relationship? My response is most victims leave their abusive partner. Once victims leave their abusive partners, most victims are stalked by their abusive partners. The Department of Justice reports that 3/4 of domestic violence homicide happens after their victims leave their abusive partner. So why is it important to pass this bill? Most offenders look for loopholes, and the loopholes in the current state statutes does not have global positioning listed as a means of stalking. By addressing the small language of global positioning devices, it'll add another level of security to the victim, assist law enforcement in their investigation, assist prosecutors in prosecuting the offender, and it holds offenders accountable, and it sends a clear message to offenders that stalking will not be tolerated.
Committee, do you have questions for Ms. Stevens? Getting all these Upton and Sundance folks zooming in, but I don't see a representative from Crook County here who's interested. That's too bad.
Well, sir, excuse me, I am from Crook County, coming
No,
via.
I'm talking about the Crook County representative
Oh,
legislature with a capital R. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Stevens? All right. Thank you, Ms. Stevens. We appreciate you zooming in with us.
thank you.
Ms. Foland, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sheryl Fallon, and in this capacity, I am a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Rawlins, Wyoming. And I have had the pleasure of working with Senator Landon and Sergeant Courtney when we first brought this bill forward in 2016 on the stalking changes. I also work with both victims and perpetrators. And I encourage you to pass this bill that we have new opportunities because criminals have this one thing in common, a lot of time to think and be creative. And they are assisted, as I learned last week, with some awesome Facebook groups, Instagram communications, and some other dark web places on how to stalk. And that is literally the names of the groups, how to stalk your victims. And it is frightening what they are capable of. While Sergeant Courtney showed you the size of the device he had, there is now another device that is the size, I don't know if you can see it, but the end of a pen. And that frightens me even more. So with this particular addition to the statute, I think law enforcement will be helped It also provides an opportunity for me to reevaluate curriculum and working with perpetrators, and then also creating some counter surveillance techniques, unfortunately, for the victims that I work with. And stalking is an equal opportunity destroyer. The victim that I worked with last week was a young man, 22 years old, and has severe PTSD now because of what's happened in his particular case. So I stand for any questions.
Committee, do you have any questions? Ms. Fallon, thank you for your testimony, and yeah, it is absolutely terrifying that that technology can be so helpful and also so scary at the same time. All right, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Any other public comment on this bill? Any other, did I miss anybody else? Anyone in the room? I'll close public comment on Senate File 100. Committee, what is your pleasure? Okay. Oh, I'll give it to, okay, so Representative Provenza moves the bill and Representative Oakley seconds the bill. Any, whoa. Any discussion on this bill? Yes, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't say anything earlier, but I do think there's been a good discussion in regards to parents. And my first thought was that it didn't bother me. Where's Ms. Chambers? And partly it's because I know that the system is not going to, accidentally or unintentionally sweep up parents, things like that, prosecuting them for harassment. But after very good discussion, and I appreciate it's been said a couple times, I think there could be actually perpetrators that are parents, unfortunately, right? But so I guess I just want to say it's my understanding of the system, and I think that's important to know. So before you're bringing a criminal charge, there's probable cause found by law enforcement. Then there's probable cause found by a prosecutor. And then in the case of a felony, there's probable cause found by a judge. And that's just to start the case. Then, of course, it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So I just don't see, I just know it's just not something that's a big concern that, parents get wrapped up and prosecuted for stalking, for the normal course of parenting. But now we have heard that, so to address this extremely remote possibility, and again, I don't think even if you had all three of those groups going forward saying there's probable cause, that a jury would then say that that a parent was stalking. So I really don't see a concern there, but the exception carve out could cause, as was said, unintended consequences. So I don't think we need to address parenting. It's not, again, looking at the wording of the statute, intending to harass, what harass means. It just isn't there. So I would be, against any sort of carve out in that way. I think this is really relatively straightforward. I think it's a good addition, and I support the bill, and I'll be an aye vote.
So I just want to make sure I understood that right. You're speaking on the amendment that doesn't exist.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that you talked about at length.
So my, just to be clear, and I guess, I'm sorry I took us on a tangent. In no way did I think they would be prosecuted. My conversation was about the divorce and custody world, that it would be used as a improper tool to increase litigation on the issue. And I still believe that will occur. And lawyers will fight over that and explain, well, you didn't harass. So you absolutely have the right to track your son's iPhone, et cetera. And there will be back and forth. I think that is going to occur no matter what. I find a lot of comfort as well in that element. Representative Oakley, as you described, that it wouldn't result in a prosecution and that a person's rights, parent's rights would not be infringed. I just think that if there were a way to make the statute more clear in those cases to avoid that unnecessary litigation, I think it would be helpful I think parents would appreciate it. I don't think it provides any more right than already exists. That was my conversation on the amendment that doesn't exist. So there's no confusion about fear of prosecution.
Right.
All right. Any other Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thought I'd let the committee know, to your shock and dismay, I'm going to vote for this bill in favor of it. But I did want to, I wanted to touch on this conversation between you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Oakley. I have two victims or clients that have come to me with concerns about tracking of cell phones of their children to then try to harass the divorce proceedings or the person they're divorcing, the parent. But I do think I think we're right in not having that amendment to try and hone in on that, just for the simple fact of some of the testimony we heard today, in hopes of, let's make sure we're protecting victims more than trying to protect that potential individual parent that might become an issue. Although that's not to say that maybe there is some sort of solution that we can come to. The other thing I want to say on this bill is that part of the reason I'm voting for this is because I have sat in interview rooms at police stations and have been told that there was nothing that they could do because stalking, it didn't fit under the special bracket. I've checked other people's cars for tracers. There certainly is a need for this. And so I look forward to having more of this discussion on the floor. And thank you to all the stakeholders who helped bring this bill forward.
Anyone else wish to discuss the amendment that does not exist? All right. Now you're ready for the question. All right. Carol, will you please do a roll call vote on Senate File 100 stalking amendments?
Representative Crago.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Oakley.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Aye.
Vice Chair Washut.
Aye.
Representative Yen.
Aye.
Representative Zwanesser has submitted an aye vote, absentee. Chairman Olson.
Aye.
It'd be 9 ayes.
We ended very strong with the last bill in the House Judiciary Committee. Good job, committee. All right. I think we're done.